Welcome to The Explainer. We're going to talk about how, in just one decade, from 1919 to 1930, India's fight for freedom just completely transformed. It went from whispers to a roar. This is the story of how a nation found its voice, figured out how to fight back, and really started on that unstoppable march to independence. So let's track that pivotal story together. So picture this. So right after World War I. India is just simmering. The British Empire had made all these promises, for India's support in the war, but the reality, it was just more hardship. And what happens when people are pushed too far? Well, you get scenes just like this one. Massive processions, thousands of regular people taking to the streets. This became a common and incredibly powerful sight. You could almost feel it, right? A new consciousness was waking up. Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with that post-war turmoil, then we'll get into this radical new idea and the man behind it. From there, we'll see how that one idea just exploded into a nationwide movement and what freedom actually meant to different people. Then we'll cover why it all suddenly stopped and finish up with that first, bold, incredible call for complete independence. All right, let's dive right in. To really get why this explosion of protest happened, you have to understand just how brutal things were for the average person in India after 1919. This level of hardship, it was the perfect storm, creating the fertile ground for a new sense of national identity, one that was forged in struggle. So the war just turned everything upside down, economically and politically. First, Britain had to pay for it all, right? So they slapped on huge taxes. Prices for everyday stuff, they doubled. Then they started forcing villagers into the army, which, as you can imagine, sparked massive anger. And if all that wasn't bad enough, then the crops failed. And on top of that, a devastating influenza pandemic swept across the country. People were hoping, praying that the end of the war would bring some relief. But nope. It just got worse. And the sheer scale of this tragedy, it's just staggering. We're talking about an estimated 12 to 13 million people gone, just from the famines and the epidemic. Think about that number. This wasn't just a statistic on a page. It was a deep, profound trauma that fueled this simmering anger all across India. So, into this moment of crisis steps a new kind of leader, Mahatma Gandhi. He'd returned to India a few years earlier in 1915 from South Africa. And he didn't just come back home. He came back armed with a radical, totally new idea for how to fight back. A new way to struggle for a people who were absolutely desperate for change. And here was the central question, right? How could a largely powerless population possibly take on one of the mightiest empires in the world? The British Empire was a military and economic juggernaut. A head-on fight? That seemed like suicide. But Gandhi's idea, well, it was something completely different. It was a way of fighting that turned all the conventional wisdom on its head. He called it satyagraha. And it's super important to get this. This was not passive resistance. Not at all. It was an active force. He called it truth force or soul force. The whole idea was, if your cause is true, if you're fighting against injustice, then you don't need physical force. You can actually win by appealing directly to the conscience of the person oppressing you. For Gandhi, this dharma, this core principle of nonviolence was everything. He argued it wasn't a weapon for the weak, it was a weapon for the strong. A kind of moral and spiritual power that he believed could do two things at once: win the fight, and, maybe even more importantly, unite all Indians while doing it. And this wasn't just some philosophical idea he cooked up. No way. It was already battle-tested. You're looking at a picture from 1913, where Gandhi used this exact method to fight racist laws back in South Africa. He led thousands of workers just like this in nonviolent protest. And you know what? It worked. So, okay, it worked on a smaller scale, but how do you take that and turn it into a nationwide movement? Well, after a few successful local campaigns in India, Gandhi felt the time was right to go big, to scale up. And, as luck would have it, The British government was about to hand him the perfect reason to do it.
And that reason was the Rowlatt Act. This law was just incredibly repressive. It basically gave the government the power to arrest political activists and hold them for 2 years without a trial. So, in response, Gandhi called for nonviolent civil disobedience. It kicked off on April 6th with something called a hartal, basically a general strike. Rallies popped up, shops shut their doors, workers walked out. The country started to grind to a halt.
Now, the British were completely alarmed by this. They saw this huge popular uprising and got scared they were losing control. So what did? They clamped down, hard. They started arresting local leaders. And then, on April 10th, in the city of Amritsar, things got ugly. Police opened fire on a totally peaceful procession, and that just poured gasoline on the fire, leading to outrage and attacks on government buildings. And all of this repression, it all culminated just 3 days later in the horrific Jallianwala Bagh massacre. A huge, peaceful crowd had gathered in this walled-in garden. Some were there to protest, sure, but many others were just there to celebrate the Baisakhi festival. Then General Dyer marched his troops in, blocked the only way out, and just ordered them to open fire on the unarmed crowd. Hundreds were killed. His reason? He later said his goal was to produce a moral effect. He wanted to create terror. As you can imagine, when news of the massacre got out, the country exploded. There were more strikes, more clashes with the police. And seeing this cycle of violence escalating, Gandhi made a tough call. He called the whole movement off. He realized that while the Satyagraha had been big, it wasn't unified enough. He knew he needed something bigger, something that could bring Hindus and Muslims together under one banner. And that's what led him to the idea of the non-cooperation movement.
So, fast forward a bit to January 1921. The non-cooperation movement officially launches. And the central call, the big idea, was for Swaraj, self-rule. Sounds simple, right? One word. But here's the thing, and this is absolutely crucial to understand. That one word, Swaraj, meant very, very different things to different groups of people. And this is what's so fascinating. Everyone saw freedom through the lens of their own daily struggle. If you were in the city, part of the middle class, Swaraj meant boycotting British goods in schools. But if you were a peasant out in the countryside, it meant an end to crushing rents and forced labor. If you were a tribal person, it meant getting your traditional rights back to the forests. And if you were a plantation worker, Swaraj was something incredibly basic, just the right to leave the tea garden and go back to your own village. Everyone had their own vision of freedom. And all of this diverse, passionate energy, that was the movement's greatest strength. But it was also its biggest challenge. Because as all these different groups started acting on their own idea of Swaraj, that core commitment to nonviolence, well, it started to fray at the edges. And this led to a crisis that forced Gandhi to make a really dramatic and deeply controversial decision. The breaking point came in February 1922 in a place called Chowri Chowra. A peaceful demonstration turned violent. It clashed with the police, and the protesters ended up attacking and setting a police station on fire, killing the officers inside. For Gandhi, this was it. This was the line that could not be crossed. He felt the entire movement was turning violent, spiraling out of his control, and so he called the whole thing off, just like that. And this sudden stop, it triggered a huge debate inside the Indian National Congress. People were asking, what now? You had two main camps. One group, the Swaraj Party, said, okay, mass protest isn't working, let's get elected to the councils and fight the British from the inside. But then you had the younger, more radical guys like Nehru and Bose, and they were saying, no way, we need more agitation, not less, and we need to demand full, complete independence now. And over the next few years, a couple of things happened that really pushed things in the radicals' favor. There was a global economic depression that was absolutely hammering Indian farmers. And then the British sent over this thing called the Simon Commission to discuss India's future, and it had 0 Indian members. The protests against it were massive, and all of this just made the radicals' argument sound more and more convincing. The big moment, the final decision, came in December 1929 at the Congress session in Lahore. With Jawaharlal Nehru as president, The radicals basically won the debate. The Congress officially changed its goal. No more talk of just self-rule. The new demand was for Purnas Raji, complete, total, absolute independence. I mean, this was a monumental shift. The party even declared a date, January 26, 1930. They said that day would be celebrated as Independence Day, a day for people all across India to take a pledge to keep fighting until freedom was won. The internal debate was finally over. The path forward was now crystal clear. But here's the thing. A declaration is one thing, right? Winning freedom is something else entirely. Full independence, that's still a pretty abstract idea for millions of people. Gandhi knew that. He knew he had to connect this big, grand idea to the real, concrete issues of everyday life. He needed a symbol, something so simple yet so powerful that it could unite literally everyone, rich, poor, Hindu, Muslim, in one single fight. So what could it be? Well, his eyes would soon fall on something you can find in every single kitchen: salt.